Hey, everybody. So tonight, let's talk about cults. Yes, you heard that right. Cults. A cult is a group that organizes around a set of beliefs, practices, or a leader that deviates from truth. And I want to emphasize that they deviate from truth. We're going to be talking about that and unpacking that. They exert a high level of control over their members, cults do. They often isolate them and demand loyalty that replaces or rivals a person, i.e., a believer's devotion to God. And they often leave members spiritually blind and inept and even vulnerable to demonic possession. And so let's talk about it because maybe even you watching today are part of a cult and you just don't know it. Been there, done that. So, welcome to another episode of the Holy Politician podcast. So cults are sometimes hard to discern because they appear to be friendly, loving, and welcoming, and they make you feel like you were chosen, right? Like out of the hundreds of thousands of people that they could have chosen, they picked you. And so you might feel lucky and even privileged to be a part of a cult. Most cults don't call themselves cults, but there are plenty of examples of cults throughout history, but particularly in modern history. But usually, once you're on the inside of a cult, things start to shape up in a manner where you feel like you may not deduce it, but truly, in reality, you really have very little control and very little say over what happens in that cult. Your movement starts to be controlled, and your identity is typically defined for you, right? And so you can think of any example across the board in society where people are identifying and they are choosing and saying, this is who you are. Cults, when you deal with them, you typically start isolating yourself from people, from family and loved ones. And then you begin to adopt the newness of the cult, right? You might have a new set of vocabulary terms, or you might have a new way of dressing or wearing your clothes or presenting yourself on the outside to the world. And you even might adopt a rigid and religious stance on everything pertaining to that cult. And if people aren't part of that group or part of that clique or part of that tribe, then you start to look down on them or you start to kind of stop befriending them. And so what begins as a subtle membership kind of indoctrination or welcoming or induction, it turns out to be truly an indoctrination and something that eventually drives and steers your existence. So I want to discuss three ways that indicate that you might be in a cult. Okay, so first, a cult distorts the gospel. So if you're a believer, that is the first thing that you should notice if you are listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit. Is there something fishy about the way that they represent God, about the way that they represent Jesus, about the truths that are found in the Bible? Which leads me to the second sign that you're in a cult, is that it rejects the truth. It completely rejects what should be true from a biblical standpoint and will basically throw it aside or say, well, times have changed and we need to deal with the times. The third sign that you're in a cult is it begins to alienate you and it might intimidate you or other people. And so three easy and prominent examples of cults are one, Jehovah's Witnesses, two, the Divine Nine, which are Black Greek letter organizations, and then in some cases, even political parties. Now, there are others, but these are three clear examples. And so let's begin with distorting the gospel, right? Over the years, we've seen how Black Greek letter organizations, who historically have stood for moral biblical principles, and they've done wonderful things throughout time, like supported people that are in impoverished countries. They've supported things like educational policy, like social justice policy. They've done things from a place where their founders profess to be people of the faith. But unfortunately, we've seen over time a deterioration of their faith to fit their social justice agenda. And that is a sign that it is cultish. And so when you decide things like you want to support the transgender phenomenon, and even the extermination of babies in the womb, that is distorting the gospel, right? That's rejecting what Jesus said, what he came for, what he died for, and what the gospel represents. Paul even said to the Galatians, quote, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion. Some people are throwing you into confusion and trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preached to you, let them be under God's curse, as we have already said. So now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. And that's in Galatians 1 6 through 9. And so I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to be under God's curse. But Paul was very clear that people are throwing you into confusion and they're perverting the gospel. And most of us are not saying or doing anything about it. We're just going right along with it because we have a fear of being alienated or isolated, or maybe we're going to lose affinity with these specific groups. Maybe we're going to lose influence, access, opportunity. But the gospel is being perverted right in front of your face. And pervert in Greek means to turn around or corrupt. And I mean, I don't know what's more perverted than the LGBTQ agenda or than an agenda that treats fetuses in the womb as though they could be exterminated at any point in time. And so that is a distortion of the gospel. Now let's talk about how a cult rejects the truth. So we've clearly seen political parties reject truth, right? The Democratic Party right now is a pretty clear and obvious one, where there are many Christian Democratic leaders that no longer acknowledge God just as God, as sovereign, as El Elyon, the Most High God, as the Rock of Ages and the one true and living God. Oftentimes you'll be in rooms or conversations or meetings with these people, and you'll hear them refer to God as like the divine or the supreme being because they want to be inclusive of everybody in that room. And at that point, if you can't say that God is God, then you really are not honoring, you're not honoring a sovereign deity. You're honoring a bunch of idolatrous representations of God. And so at this point, it's not really clear why these Democratic Christian leaders are praying at all. I think they'd just be better off that they just don't open their meetings with any prayer, just have some encouraging quotes, but don't reference the gospel, don't reference any kind of sovereign deity when you cannot name God as God. Just stop the charade altogether. There is only one God and there is one standard of truth. In the beginning was the Word and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And so there is one God, there is one standard of truth, there is one Lord of all. And that standard of truth, if you're a Christian, his name is Jesus, not the divine, not the supreme one, not whatever other moniker that people are making up for their pseudo God. And so Second Peter 2 1 through 4 reads, but also in those days, there arose false prophets among the people, just as there will be false teachers among yourselves who will subtly and stealthily introduce heretical doctrines or destructive heresies, even denying and disowning the master who bought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their immoral ways and lascivious doings. Because of them, the true way will be maligned and defamed. And in their covetousness, their lust, their greed, they will exploit you with false, cunning arguments. From of old, the sentence of condemnation for them has not been idle. Their destruction and their eternal misery has not been asleep. For God did not even spare angels that sin, but he cast them into hell, delivering them to be kept there in pits of gloom till the judgment and their doom. That's 2 Peter 2, 1 through 4. And so, what are we going to do when the true way is being maligned and defamed? Are we going to say nothing just because we want membership in a cult? Finally, another way that we can identify a cult is that cults alienate and they intimidate, right? They're often extreme groups that subtly or directly control you. They control your movements, they control who you're in community with, and oftentimes you can get excommunicated or kicked out or canceled, right? If you confront them with truth, or if you choose to withdraw your membership, you get canceled, right? And so people and even family members that you thought would be a part of your life forever, or at least for a significant season, they will cut you off without even batting an eyelash. And so Jehovah's Witnesses, they have a practice that essentially historically has been referred to as disfellowshipping, which essentially means if you commit a serious sin, you're removed from the congregation. You're basically kicked out of the Jehovah's Witnesses church. And some of these sins they talk about are like adultery, fornication, domestic abuse, homosexuality. And so they can just basically excommunicate you and kick you out. And so on their website, it says the Bible says that Christians should stop keeping company with someone who has been removed from the congregation, not even eating with such a man. And they reference 1 Corinthians 5:11. And so they say, so we do not socialize with someone who has been removed. And so families that are part of this community are essentially being torn apart because of this disfellowshipping experience. And so I want to show you a quick clip of this young woman. She's a fifth generation Jehovah's Witness, but she has since stepped away from that cult. She no longer associates with the church, and she's become a very loud critic of the church because of obvious reasons, because they're a cult. So take a look at this clip.
And I'm going to show it in just a second, of a woman calling her daughter, her grown daughter. In the caller ID photo, you can see this woman isn't very young. I would say she's probably in her 60s. And she leaves this voicemail, and it's tragic.
Mom's disfellowshipping still feels so raw.
Elsa, please pick up. I miss you so much. I just want to hear your voice.
It's such a struggle. I miss her. She taught me the truth. Gave me a stable life. She was my closest friend.
Just listen to how they manipulate people into believing that you have got to shun these people for their own good and for your own good.
And so this is what cults do. So my question to you is, are you or someone you know, somebody you love, are you in a cult? And frankly, we should all be asking ourselves this question. And I'm constantly checking where my own allegiance lies, right? Absolutely, we should all practice what we preach. But sometimes, because it's so subtle and it sneaks up on you, you might not know that you are in a membership or you're part of an organization that is either distorting the gospel, rejecting the truth, and causes this atmosphere of alienation and intimidation. So check yourself across those three buckets. Is it distorting the gospel? Is it rejecting the truth? Is it alienating and intimidating? You may very well be in a cult if you can say yes to these things. And interestingly enough, that cult just might be your job. So I'll leave it right there. Thank you for watching. Until next time.